Welcome, everyone. So, I'm going to talk about the last phase of shadow work, which isn't well known, and people rightfully have questions about it. And the most basic question that I get is there an end to shadow work? And the answer to that is yes. So I have a couple of videos out already, the basics of understanding shadow work, as well as one called The Benefits of Shadow Work, talking all about kind of the basics of shadow work and how projections work. But for a basic reminder, I will say that when we are in our formative years, when we are younger, due to our parents, due to society, due to pop culture, due to our schools, due to the world, we learn that certain aspects of ourselves are not okay. They are shameful. They aren't right. We shouldn't be proud of them. And so what happens is that we cut these parts of ourselves off. We come out of wholeness. My favorite descriptor of this is Robert Bly, who wrote one of the original books on understanding the human shadow, where he talks about how we make all these parts of ourselves shadow and we put them in the long bag we drag behind us. And so essentially, what happens with our shadow is that we cut all these parts of ourselves off. And these are not only kind of the dark and what we think of as being the shameful aspects of ourselves, the darker emotions. It's also things like our light, our power, our genius, our creativity, our beauty. So shadows of light as well. Um, and so what happens is that most of us emerge into adulthood being only a fraction of what we were and what we possibly could be. And so an interesting thing happens when we make things shadow is that try as we might, those parts of ourselves that we have not claimed, those emotions we haven't processed, or the parts of ourselves we haven't taken responsibility for, all of our blind spots, they don't go anywhere. We are continually living them out. And most significantly, we push them onto other people. And this is what is known as a projection, in that what we see in people and what we see in the world is a result of our shadows, as a result of ourselves coming out of wholeness and the parts of ourselves that we have pushed onto other individuals, groups, and the collective. And so this can get quite complicated. So I will say for simplicity that you can check out my book, Shadow Work for the Soul, to have a whole course in this. But I will also say in this video that if you come across one person that is a jerk, that person may just be a jerk. If you come across 5, 10, 15 people that are jerks, the that is enough of a pattern to be start to consider if you are perhaps projecting, that there's something inwardly for you to be aware of or to heal. Shadow work is such an effective method of coming into self-awareness and healing because we aren't conscious of this stuff. Typically, what we heal is stuff that's coming up into our awareness. Our shadows really are in our blind spots. And so, what we see in others can be a wonderful mirror, a wonderful indicator as to what we could stand to look at within ourselves. So let's go on to the question that I receive quite a bit, which is there an end to shadow work? And the answer is yes. You can do enough shadow work that you take back the bulk of your projections onto other people and into the world. And I am always careful about this because there is a sort of tension or balance between recognizing that you have come into wholeness, you have come into individuation, as is called. Basically, you know who you are, you know what you think, you know what your divine attributes are, separate from what media thinks, what the people around you think, who other people want you to be. That is really a huge indicator that you have completed a substantial amount of shadow work, is to be wholly yourself. And that comes from reclaiming all of those projections that we tend to put out into the world. There are other benefits that I talk about in my benefits video, such as greater emotional stability, greater clarity about the world, greater emotional intelligence, all of that sort of good stuff as well. But if we are talking about the end of shadow work and what happens there, is that an interesting switch happens. For somebody to be invested in shadow work or any sort of self-inquiry work or substantial spiritual work, there needs to be a great deal of responsibility that is taken on within the self. There needs to be some sort of reason, typically, some sort of calling to be willing to look at parts of the self that we kind of shove down and shove out into the world for a reason. And so people who get to this point have taken on so much responsibility for themselves, and they may even have childhood patterns of taking hyper responsibility for themselves. For example, some children needed to be caretakers for their parents, some children were parentified, meaning that they had to take care of other children in their family. And some children were taught, due to the environment in their home, to not want anything, to not need anything, and to have a sort of forced independence before they were developmentally ready for it. And this can have a real impact in adulthood. But the positive aspect of it is that there is also real impetus in those who have taken such responsibility for themselves to continue to do so, to continue to work on themselves and look at themselves in a way that people who were not kind of put into those patterns of hyper responsibility or developmentally inappropriate responsibility perhaps may struggle with. It is easy to use shadow work or any spiritual work to spiritually bypass or to look away from our issues, look away from our emotions, look away from our bodies in this world. So a curious thing happens when you do take back all of your projections, or the vast majority of them, is that you still are in a place where you are like, okay, if I keep on running into the same person, just in different bodies, having the same conversation, the same type of imbalance in my life, I will certainly look at that. But the curious thing that happens is that there is a separation process that happens. And so some people may ask me, like, well, wait a moment. I keep on hearing about union states, about feeling more connected. And that happens as well. This is one of the paradoxical things. Because the paradox is that when we do not have a strong sense of self, we tend to look for acceptance outside of ourselves. We tend to merge or connect with people in a way in which we lose our identity, lose our sense of self, lose aspects of our personality. We tend to blend, to take on like a sponge, or to be, kind of old words, codependent, or somehow out of balance with our relationships. Basically, there is not a sense of this is me, this is fully who I am, this is you, this is fully who you are. Let's meet and exchange energies with one another in our wholeness, with our sense of self. There is a sense of there is something that I feel is wrong, broken, missing, out of balance, feels empty within myself. And so what's going to happen is that I'm going to blend and merge with you, with your emotions, with what the world wants from me, with what I think will gain belonging and acceptance. And so one of the biggest curiosities and interesting experiences is to come out of this state of kind of an unfortunate and unhealthy blend with other people, with groups, with the world, and be able to come into a place where you are a separate whole self but connected in a life-affirming, healthy way with other people, with the world, etc., with the universe, etc., etc. So that is the first interesting thing that happens. The second is that I think that a lot of us go into spiritual work and even shadow work with a bit of sort of naivete to it. And it's a wonderful naivete, but it is sort of a childlike notion that if we only work on ourselves enough, if we only do enough, if we only get to a certain point spiritually, everything will be kumbaya. The world will be a wonderful place. People will treat us with respect. They will see how special we are. They will be nice to us. They will love us. Everybody will be in a state of recognizing us for the lovely, special being that we are. And so some people do not have this sort of, innocence because of their experiences of the world. But a lot of us really do go into spirituality with the thought that if only I were to change myself, the world will change. And to some small degree, it really does. But what really happens is our reactivity changes, we gain a stronger sense of self, a stronger sense of being in the present moment, becoming more emotionally stable, becoming more sort of present, aware of ourselves overall. And so that can very much ripple out and change our relationships with family, and with other people that we encounter. But one of the sort of rude awakenings of the end of shadow work is that you are no longer projecting onto people, other people, but they may be projecting onto you still. And so um, other people may be anything from, doing mild projections to being completely unhinged towards you. And it has nothing to do with anything that you can control, or has nothing to do with anything within yourself that you can take responsibility for. What you discover is that the best way I can describe it is that people are sort of locked within a bubble of their own trauma, their own vision of reality. Sometimes that's tunnel vision, sometimes that's, much wider vision of reality, of their own thoughts, especially their own fears, their own kind of neuroses, all of that sort of stuff adds up to the Khalil Gibran quote. I believe that was him, that we don't, no, it was Anais Nin, that we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. And so what tends to happen with people who've done a lot of shadow work is that they get to a point where they're no longer projecting, but they can recognize that other people are projecting onto them and can see it more and more clearly. Um, and that there is no level of, unfortunately, personal responsibility or control that you can have over other people. And so this brings us to the last point of what happens at the end of doing shadow work. Much of what we love about spirituality, what we're drawn to regarding spirituality, has to do with the illusion of control. And so we go through so many different, in the modern world, so many different traditions, so many different thoughts, so many different illusions on a spiritual level that make us, that either cater to our basic wounds, to our unhealed shadows, our need to be special, our need to be superior, our need to shove our self-hatred and ignorance as far away from ourselves as we possibly can, our need to be a victim in this world and make other people a villain. All of those are very potent, shadowy things to look at within ourselves. But what happens at the end of this, when you've taken your projections back, when you've really done your shadow work, is that you come to a point where you recognize that how illusory this matter of control is. That try as we might, we cannot drag all of our darkness out into the light, nor should we. And so what happens is that if we truly go into our shadows long enough and deep enough, not only do we find ourselves in wholeness, not only do we see kind of the end of our projections and all those benefits I mentioned, but we start to come to a place within ourselves where things are less about logic, about making sense of things, about making order about things, and more sitting with things like uncertainty and chaos, and really feeling into those and accepting those. And if we can really feel into those and accept those, we can fully claim our shadow. And what that means is that we can fully claim the instinctual dark aspects of ourselves. And so when people often think of reclaiming the dark and instinctual aspects of themselves is to bring them into the light, to make sense of them, to make logic out of them, to create a narrative or story regarding them. And so really sinking into your shadow, into your chaos, into your intuition, into your primal instincts, into this dark instinctual self means that a lot of that starts to break apart and end. There no longer is that sort of mental narrative in which everything needs to make sense. It can be experienced instead. A good example of this is dream work. There are a lot of different approaches to dream work out there. However, a typical one is for people to go into the darkness. So we can consider each sleep to be our own descent into the underworld, so to speak. And when we wake up, to write down our dreams, to look up symbols, to Google meanings of what we heard, what we saw, what we experienced. And this is a wonderful phase. This is a wonderful thing that can provide so much information from our subconscious or from even the collective unconscious to our conscious mind. However, there is a point at which you can dream those things. You can have dreams and no longer need to analyze them. You simply experience them, feel them, and let them remain in the dark. Let them remain as symbol. Let them remain as a dark experience, as instinct, as intuition, without the desire to change it, to dissect it, to even fully know it. And it is at this point that true communion, true connection happens, which is much more of a feeling state than a knowing state. And so if we are talking about the last phase of shadow work, it very much has to do with reclaiming and understanding how much of our being is formed by chaos, and of stopping trying to drag the dark aspects of ourself into the light to dissect them, to get to know them. And in this way, we can start to participate in the magic and mystery of it all, to accept things as they are, to let feelings and spiritual experiences and all creativity, all of these beautiful dark aspects of of our being come forward and just simply be as they are instead of bringing them out into the light and thus changing them in some regard. So I hope that you've enjoyed this. Again, look to my book, Shadow Work for the Soul, where I go over this and I go over plenty of other things regarding the shadow, personally, collectively, and all of that.